Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate it. It really does mean the world to me. And today we are talking about dumb garden mistakes I made when I first started out. If you are new here, hi, my name is Annie and I make videos about home and garden content, specifically gardening within the parameters of shade. So a lot of my content focuses specifically on shade tolerant plants, trees, and shrubs, and creating gardens in a woodland setting. So these are 5 things that nobody told me and dumb mistakes that I made when I first started gardening. Now these are from my own personal gardening journey and experience. For all I know, I might say something you might be like, girl, you're dumb as hell. But if I'm able to help anybody else out in starting their own garden journeys or just like casually getting into landscaping, when I first started, of course, I did not think I was going to be as serious about it as I am now. And I think because I was only like casually gardening, I did have a lack of information. So some of these are things I could have avoided with like more research, but I also think some of this does just come from trial and error and figuring things out as you go. I think that is a huge part of gardening. But like I said, since I started as just like casually dabbling in this, I didn't really want to spend a bunch of time researching and stuff. As I started to learn more over time, I was able to look back and be like, wow, why didn't I do this thing when I started? Anyway, let's jump into the content. Here are 5 dumb mistakes I made when I first started gardening. And the first one, I'm gonna start with my number 1 mistake, and that is soil matters. When I first started my casual gardening, I was like, soil is soil. I think most of us learn about like photosynthesis and the basic life cycle of plants with like water and the sun, but somehow it did not really occur to me how many nutrients the plant gets from soil. I'm almost fairly certain when I first started doing some container gardening at my old house that I literally dug soil up out of my yard to use in the containers, which now I'm like, oh my gosh. Don't do that, and you want to make sure you're getting the right soil for the right application, of course. Obviously, potting soil, ground soil, house plant soil, tropical plant soil. Like I said, when I was first starting out, I was like, whatever, it's soil, like how different can it be? But there are so many, like, depending on the origin of where your plant comes from, they all want different types of soil. Soil matters. So if you are investing your time, your efforts, your money into making something beautiful in your yard, it's worth spending the little extra money on nurturing it, feeding it, making sure that it's going to be the best it can be. And I am a big proponent of amending your soil that you already have to work with. That can make a huge difference for the plants that are living in your yard and in your landscape. If you are planting summer annuals in dirt that was used by last year's summer annuals, they are going to struggle because all of the nutrients has been sucked out of that dirt and it is not doing anything for those plants. Like I said, somebody might listen to this and be like, you're just dumb. How'd you not know that? Maybe I was just dumb. I don't know. But that was my biggest mistake I was making in the beginning. My next big mistake. Container gardening and planting in pots is not necessarily easier than planting in the landscape. I started off with planters and pots and container gardening because it seemed a lot less threatening, I guess. It feels like it would be like more manageable, but this is actually not the case at all. Any plant I started with in a container garden setting never did nearly as well as when I started planting things into the landscape. That was such a turning point for me and being like, wow. So like I said, I first started dabbling into gardening at my old house with some different pots and containers, and I was always struggling, always fighting, there was always some sort of issue. At my old house, I also built like this big DIY planter box that I initially had wanted to use for like herbs and vegetables, but I ended up doing a bunch of geraniums in there. They looked beautiful all in that box, but I remember them being very high maintenance and thirsty. I had also planted my first hydrangea in a container, thinking I would be able to take care of it better, which was very opposite of the circumstance. I killed that thing probably within the first 2 months from root rot, overwatering it. In general, container and planter gardening just requires more watering, more bagged soil, and just overall more maintenance. Either root rot from overwatering or roots drying out from underwatering is so easy to happen. When you plant something in the ground, it just adjusts to its environmental conditions better. Your plants are able to retain more water. It's so much easier to amend the soil using like one bag of ground soil versus a bunch of bags for containers. Overall, I have just found that gardening in the ground is a lot easier than gardening in containers. Just something to note if you're starting out. I don't know why it is that containers seem less threatening or like more low maintenance to the non-gardener. Again, that could have just been my own stupidity. Don't be afraid to plant things in the ground. You're better off. All right, the number 3 dumb thing that nobody told me about gardening when I first started was that you don't need to blow a ton of money. There are so many ways that you can get either free or cheap plants to add into your yard and your landscape. And that starts with, don't be afraid to divide what you have or propagate from what you have. When I first moved into this house, I think there was 3 or 4 hosta plants, individual hostas on this property. I now probably have 50 to 60 individual hosta plants, and they all came from those 3 or 4 initial ones that are on the property because I kept dividing them up. Plants are not as like fragile as you think they are. I mean, it is always best to go and look up how to divide something specifically, but if you have an existing plant or shrub in your yard, look into dividing it, look into propagating it, especially with something that's maybe completely overgrown and you're like, or in a spot that you're not really liking it. Think about transplanting it, think about dividing it up, think about other ways you can utilize what's already in your yard and multiply on that. Also, ask your friends, your family, your neighbors. Sharing is caring, especially hostas. Hostas are like the easiest plant to divide, so that is always a good starting point. I've moved around a couple different pretty established azaleas and transplanted them, and you don't need to just like go out and spend a bunch of money on plants. Think about working within the parameters of what you have and take the time to think about what you truly love and want to add to your space and slowly build on that. Mistake number 4 I made when starting out, and this kind of applies and goes in with some of the things I already mentioned, but that is spending my time and money on annuals because they seem less intimidating. Again, this might just be my own personal experience and my own personal feelings, but when I was first starting out with putting things into pots and planters, it was usually annuals like impatiens. I think I did some petunias, just basic summer annuals. And granted, there's nothing wrong with annuals. I love annuals. However, I don't think they're necessarily the best choice for someone who is starting out with gardening, just because you don't get that longevity and your investment back from them, and they are usually just fussier and more high maintenance than perennials are. I do summer annuals every year, and every year I have an issue with something. There's like a disease, something happens. I've never had a complete smooth run with annuals. I think if you are starting off with wanting to add some interest in your landscape, or you know, have something in the summer that you can enjoy, I think you're just better off choosing some low maintenance perennials. I know I talked about hostas, but hostas are just like one of the best choices for beginner gardening, especially if you have shade, and land hostas do grow pretty well in containers too, so they're just so versatile. And my number 4 dumb mistake I was making as a beginner gardener is thinking that spring is the best time to plant. This is not true. It's fall. I think because all of the nurseries and the big box stores and everything around us, like, that's obviously when things start to bloom and come out of their dormancy. I think just naturally anyone's like, oh, this is a good time to garden, this is a good time to plant, which it can be, but fall is technically the better part of the year to be planting your plants in most cases. For like trees and shrubs and most perennials, planting them in the fall and letting them go into dormancy over the winter just gives them more time to get established in the soil. That extra few weeks a plant has in the fall before going dormant to establish its roots and get comfortable in the ground before it freezes is going to be very beneficial for it to have way more growth the next spring than if you just planted it in the springtime. And if you have something in a container that you haven't planted yet, you're way better off putting it in the ground and letting it overwinter than leaving it in its pot. Nurseries and plant places in the big box stores have just like tricked you into thinking spring is the best time to buy, since that's when everything is starting to grow. And obviously that's when stores are putting out their new plant inventory and getting everybody excited and they want you to buy. However, I have gotten some banging deals in the fall buying plants marked down on clearance. I purchased my very first Japanese maple tree last fall. I'm pretty sure it was under $20 and originally $100. It was just like a steal and I'm in love with it. I wanted a Japanese maple for so long. It's usually like shrubs and trees will be clearance down really cheap in the fall, especially at those big box stores. They need to get rid of it, so basically they give them away for free. I feel like I would say the majority of my plants have come from fall clearance sales. And if you are willing to put in a little bit more effort and work, you can pick up summer annuals, usually midsummer through fall, for essentially free. My local nursery was giving away summer annuals for free, like July and after. You can always get those for dirt cheap, and if you're willing to put in the work to keep them alive as houseplants or keep them dormant in your garage, of course, that is another great freebie option as well. So those were my big 5 mistakes. I have a bonus one that I didn't want to put in its own category because it's kind of smaller, but my bonus mistake is that you can plant spring bulbs way later than you think you can, or that the internet or the instructions tell you can. So specifically in today's climate, times are changing. If your ground isn't frozen, you can put bulbs in there. It doesn't matter if it's December or January or even February half the time. If your ground's not frozen, you can put the bulbs in there. If your ground is frozen, you can plant some bulbs in a container, and you can just pop those outside somewhere and let them do their thing, and they will blossom in the spring when the time is right. You can really push the envelope with that timing. Don't think you need to miss out because you didn't plant your bulbs in October. There is just so much more leeway with that than people think there is. All right, you guys, and that is gonna do it for my countdown of dumb beginner gardening mistakes I made when I started out. If this video and its content was any way, shape, or form helpful or informative to you, I would love if you could give this video a nice thumbs up. If there is anything that I talked about and you disagree with, I want to hear it. Let's talk about it down in the comments. I always say I am up for constructive criticism. I think gardening can be such a personal thing. There are so many variables, so let's discuss it. I would love for you to consider subscribing to my channel. I have some big plans and I am so excited for all the work that I've put in. So I would love for you to join me for this upcoming spring season. And if you are still here, I just want to say thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I truly appreciate it. And I will see you guys very soon in a brand new video. Bye!